20 years ago, I went to prison for the disappearance of my best friend, Bennett. When it happened, I tried to explain exactly how it went down, but nobody believed me. Eventually, I caved under the pressure of my interrogators. They twisted my words, manipulated my mind, and coerced a confession out of me that wasn't true. I pled no contest to the charges and was sent away for something I didn't do. But now, after all these years, I'm finally free. And now, for the first time, I can tell the truth. Bennett's name still echoes in my mind. We grew up together, like brothers. We didn't come from the same background, but we both understood the rebellion in our hearts. Neither of us were strangers to crime. We weren't the dangerous types. No robbing, no killing. But we loved breaking the rules. It was the thrill, the rush, the adrenaline that came from outsmarting people who were supposed to be smarter than us. It was just fun. Both of us came from well-off families. Neither of us really needed to steal, but we did it because it felt good. Breaking the law felt like breaking free from the dull, predictable lives that our parents lived. Bennett was always the bold one, always the one pushing the limits, dragging me along with him. He had this reckless confidence that I envied, and even though I always thought I could back out, I rarely did. One of our favorite pastimes was sneaking into abandoned buildings, particularly construction sites and old factories. Something about the crumbling walls, the empty rooms, the decay. It felt like we were reclaiming them, giving them new life in our imagination. But one night, we took it too far. One night, we broke into the old, abandoned police station. The building had been sitting empty for years. A newer, larger police station had opened just down the street, leaving the old one to rot. It had been built back in the 1940s, and it had a dark history, one we never really bothered to look into. The whole town had forgotten about it, or so we thought. We saw the rusted barbed wire fence that surrounded the property and decided to make it our next adventure. Bennett had brought along a knockoff Polaroid camera, hoping to snap some eerie pictures of the place. I'd packed a few empty backpacks to haul out anything we could find. Getting in was easy enough. We just cut the chain on the gate and slipped through, then smashed the locks on the front door. Inside, it was exactly what we'd hoped for. The dark hallways, the decaying furniture, the crumbling records in the booking station. We trashed the sheriff's office, ransacked the filing cabinets, and even tried to find weapons in the armory, though all we found were a few old billy clubs. Still, it felt like a treasure hunt, but nothing could have prepared me for what we found next. There, in the back of the building, were 4 jail cells. They were old and rusted, and the iron bars creaked under the slightest touch. But what really caught our attention was the key ring. It was just hanging there on the wall, the keys to the cells in plain sight. I grinned at Bennett, and we both knew what we were going to do next. We decided to play cop and criminal. One of us would lock the other in a cell, and then we'd have a bit of fun pretending to be cops. It was childish, silly, but in the moment, it felt like the most exciting thing in the world. We challenged each other to rock, paper, scissors to see who would play which part. I won, and of course, I chose to be the cop. Bennett was game, like always. He pretended to be handcuffed and walked into the cell like a good criminal. I locked the door behind him, laughing, and told him to enjoy his time in jail. Bennett shot me a look, half annoyed, half amused, but I could tell he was a little nervous. He trusted me, but there was always that hint of doubt. He knew me well enough to know that I was capable of anything. At first, we were both laughing. I was yelling ridiculous cop things at him, and he was shouting back sarcastic remarks. But as time went on, the laughs started to fade. "Come on, man. Let me out," Bennett yelled after a while. His voice echoed through the empty halls, almost making the whole place feel alive. "Shut up, you waste of flesh," I shouted back, pretending to be the tough cop. "You'll get out when you can pay your bail." "I don't have no bail, you bastard," Bennett hollered, a chuckle in his voice despite the tension. I couldn't help but laugh a little. "I know, because all your money is stolen." That's when it happened. For a moment, there was silence. I thought Bennett was just playing it up, trying to think of something funny to say next. But then, his voice came through the bars, low and serious. "I'm serious, man. Let me out. I can't take it in here anymore." The tone of his voice sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a joke anymore. He was desperate. I could hear it in his words, in the way they shook. I immediately jumped up from the sheriff's desk and rushed down the hallway to the cell. But when I got there, Bennett was gone. The door was locked. It hadn't been tampered with, but Bennett wasn't there. Panic set in. I threw the door open, checked under the bed, behind the lockers, the small corner by the wall. But there was no sign of him. "Bennett," I yelled, my voice cracking. "Where are you?" But there was only silence. The empty, suffocating silence of the old building. Then I heard the door behind me creak. I turned quickly, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I rushed to it, frantic. My hand shot out to keep it open, but it was like something was pushing back, holding the door shut. I fought against it, trying to pull the door open, but it was impossible. My wrist was caught, and I screamed in pain as the door crushed it. When I finally managed to pull my hand free, the fear was overwhelming. I couldn't even think. I didn't care about Bennett anymore. I just wanted out. I didn't even search for him. I ran, got out of the building, and didn't look back. Days passed, weeks. The police investigated Bennett's disappearance, and of course, the blame fell on me. I couldn't explain it. I tried to, but no one believed me. They said I'd locked him in and left him to die. They said I was responsible, but I wasn't. Whatever was in that building, it took him. It almost took me too. And maybe, just maybe, it should have. The raid at the old house. I'm a retired sheriff's deputy now, and I've seen more than my fair share of horrific things. I've been part of enough high-intensity raids and investigations to know what it's like to be face-to-face with danger. But this was different. This was something that stayed with me long after I left the force. This particular day had started like any other. It wasn't a surprise raid or anything out of the ordinary. In fact, we had been waiting for months to act. There was this old, abandoned house on the outskirts of the neighborhood. The owners had died years ago, and the property had been left to rot. The bank foreclosed on it, and then just let it sit there, decaying. It had become a haven for squatters, drug dealers, and criminals of all sorts. The plan was simple. We had a warrant, and we were going to clear the house. We had a tip-off from a contractor who'd gone in for a pre-demolition inspection, and he came running out, pale as a ghost. He said there was something in the house, something that wasn't right. So, we assembled a team, a dozen officers, including a few from the SWAT team, and I wasn't on the front lines, but I wasn't far behind. We surrounded the house with squad cars and waited. The operation was smooth, and we breached the door in a matter of seconds. The squatters inside barely had time to react, but as soon as we stepped into the house, things started to feel off. It wasn't just the smell. Something else was wrong. I could feel it in the air. My partner and I were sent down to the basement to check for any remaining threats. But the further we went down those stairs, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. When we reached the bottom, I felt my heart race. The smell was unbearable now. Something rotten, like decay. There was movement in the shadows, but it wasn't just the people we were looking for. I felt eyes on me, like something was watching. A SWAT officer started shouting, and suddenly there was chaos. A man tried to escape through a small window, but he wasn't fast enough. We caught him, restrained him, and continued our search. But nothing could prepare us for what we found next. As we moved deeper into the basement, I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The place was crawling with things I can't even explain. It was almost like the house itself was alive, like it was trying to swallow us whole. The walls seemed to close in, and every step I took felt heavier. The stench was unbearable, and the deeper we went, the worse it got. There was something in that house, something that didn't want us to leave. The night had fallen thick and heavy as the SWAT team prepared to breach the decrepit building. My partner and I stood there, nerves taut, waiting for the signal. This wasn't the first time we had taken part in a raid, but this one felt different. We were dealing with an underground drug ring, one that had gotten far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. As we waited, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the night. The sharp, biting air filled my lungs, and the distant sound of sirens only heightened the unease bubbling inside me. We had been briefed on the operation. Arrest the key players, seize any illegal materials, and leave before the situation escalated. But something in the back of my mind kept whispering that this night wasn't going to go as planned. The doors burst open, and the team rushed inside, their heavy boots pounding against the wooden floors. I followed my partner through the chaos, trying to keep my focus on the mission. We moved through the dimly lit hallways, clearing rooms one by one, until we came across a particularly disturbing scene. The door was half open, and I could hear voices inside, a mix of shouting and muffled growls. We both knew who we were about to face. The Fat Man. He was one of the worst on the list, violent, unpredictable, and ruthless. His criminal record was a testament to his capability for destruction. We kicked the door open and rushed in. The Fat Man was cornered, his back pressed against the wall, eyes wide with madness. His bloodshot gaze locked onto us, his chest heaving as he breathed in ragged gasps. He was bigger than I had imagined, his bulk obscuring the small room as he struggled to break free from the officers restraining him. Before we could move in, he let out a low, guttural growl like something primal, something lost in the deepest corners of his soul. My partner and I exchanged a look, unsure of how to proceed. This man, who looked like he could crush a person with a single swing, was shaking with rage. His hands were bound, but I knew the real danger wasn't in his physical strength. It was in his mind. The officers struggled to hold him back, their hands shaking under the immense power of his thrashing. Suddenly, a SWAT member, already showing signs of frustration, lost his patience. In an instant, the butt of his rifle came down hard on the Fat Man's skull, knocking him to the ground. But even then, the man didn't stop. He spat in the officer's face, his blood mixing with the officer's visor. It was the sort of act you couldn't ignore, the type of defiance that could provoke anyone to lose control. The officer, now livid, raised his weapon again, but before he could act, the other team members rushed in, pulling him back. As the chaos calmed, I felt the unsettling sensation crawl up my spine. My knees were shaking, my body feeling weak from the tension. We had to make sure the situation didn't spiral out of control. But as I looked down at the man, now lying unconscious on the ground, something shifted inside me. That stench. It was unbearable. At first, I had chalked it up to the rank smell of sweat and dirt. But as I stood there, processing everything that had happened, the scent started to register in my brain. It was unmistakable. The scent of infant feces. I glanced at my partner, and he looked back at me, his face paling. We knew then, with sudden, horrible clarity, what had triggered the man's rage. The basement, which had seemed like any other dingy space, was suddenly horrifying. As I moved toward the back of the room, my heart pounded in my chest. The dim light barely illuminated what lay ahead. 6 cribs lined the walls, each one containing a child. My stomach twisted. There were infants, toddlers too many to count, all of them covered in filth, some gagged by pacifiers tied tightly with cords, digging into their tiny faces. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. This wasn't just a drug house. It was a twisted daycare for those who couldn't care less. The cries of the children, muffled by their pacifiers, finally broke through the haze of disbelief. My hands shook as I approached the nearest crib, gently lifting one of the babies. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. What could I even say? How could this be happening right under our noses? I removed the pacifier, and the child's cries were so loud, so pained, that they nearly shattered my heart. The sound of their suffering seemed to echo in the room, and as I held them, I realized that every second I wasted here was a second longer they had been suffering. It was only then, as the team members rushed down the stairs and began taking in the scene, that I realized how utterly unprepared I was for what we had uncovered. The investigation that followed uncovered a hideous truth. The drug addicts who had been squatting in the house had created a depraved daycare center to care for their unwanted children, so they could indulge in their addiction without a care in the world. All the children were taken into foster care, and their faces have stayed with me since. I still think about them every day. The trauma they endured, the pain they suffered, all because the world failed them at every turn. But what happened to them? Are they safe? Are they happy? These questions haunt me, and I know I'm not the only one who wonders. Story 2. The consequences of a foolish night during the lockdown. Everything felt surreal. It was almost as if the world had stopped turning, and we were all just floating in this suspended animation. But for me, it was a time of strange happiness. My girlfriend and I had just started dating, and we spent the first few weeks of the lockdown exploring each other's company. Everything was new, fresh. We were both 18, just finishing high school. No responsibilities, no obligations. My life felt like it was finally coming together. I had just gotten my driver's license, and we would spend hours driving around town, enjoying the quiet, the emptiness of it all. There was no rush. No one to tell us where to be, what to do. We were free. One night, we found a secluded parking lot at a local park. It was dark, and the world around us seemed to fade away. The night was ours. We were so caught up in the excitement of the moment that we didn't even realize the consequences of our actions. We had a bottle of knockoff Fireball and some weed just to make the night feel special. But we didn't know that someone who had once been our friend, had called the cops on us. They thought I was a drug dealer, and they had no idea what we were actually doing. The night started out like any other, but it quickly turned into a nightmare. We smoked a joint, drank the whole bottle under the cover of darkness, and then, in a moment of intimacy, things took a turn we hadn't expected. That's when the headlights hit us. 3 police cars, lights off, creeping toward us. I froze, staring through the rearview mirror as they surrounded my car. There was no escape. Before we could even react, the door was ripped open. The next few moments happened so quickly, I barely had time to process what was happening. One officer yanked me out of the car, slamming me onto the ground, handcuffing me. My girlfriend screamed, refusing to get out of the car. The officers pulled her out, throwing her to the ground, handcuffing her too. We were humiliated. The flashlights blinded us, and I could hear neighbors waking up, watching us get dragged out like criminals. Then came the questions. They searched my car, finding the weed and the empty alcohol bottle. The charges came quickly: DUI, drug possession, trespassing, and indecent exposure. The last charge hit hardest. We were caught having sex in my car, and in their eyes, that was a crime. In the courtroom, it was worse. The officer who had arrested me made sure to present every piece of evidence in a way that painted me as a degenerate. The judge didn't hesitate. 6 months in jail, probation for years. And the worst part? We were now both registered sex offenders for the rest of our lives. My girlfriend, traumatized by the entire event, broke up with me while I was still in jail. My life, which had seemed so perfect just months before, had crumbled in an instant. And now, every time I think about that night, every time I see a police car, I can't help but feel the anger rising. Because of one foolish mistake, my life will never be the same. So, be careful. Because sometimes, the things you think are harmless can destroy everything you've built in a single, heart-stopping moment.